Now we go directly to Capitol Hill, where Senator Orrin Hatch went on the record. Senator, nice to see you, sir.
Good to see you.
How do you like that tax bill?
I think that's a pretty good bill. Actually, about 3/4 of it is something that I think I can support completely. I'd like the tax relief to be permanent. But that's apparent. We couldn't get that.
But even permanent, sort of a misnomer. I mean, we had tax relief in the 1980s, but then it creeps up. I mean, this whole idea of permanence, a little bit of.
Well, we weren't going to get permanent. So
but it doesn't even exist, though.
Yeah. The one thing, the reason I voted for it is because I don't want to give $721 billion, which is what would happen on January 1st, to this administration to go out on another spending binge. Because they won't use it to pay down the deficit. They'll use it to just spend more and, of course, try and re-elect more Democrats.
Well, some of the people in your party are very upset or concerned, and maybe you might fall into this category, the fact that the extension of the unemployment benefits was not paid for, that instead it was further going to debt.
Well, I would have preferred the unemployment insurance to be paid for, naturally, and they weren't going to pay for it. But let's be honest about it. The Democrats have always won on unemployment insurance and extending it. Now, it's well over 100 weeks now. There's no question that there are people who are suffering. I don't want them to suffer. On the other hand, we also know there are people who could be working who won't work because they've got unemployment insurance, and they just don't go out and start looking for jobs, and especially jobs that might not be as good as what they had before. So these are all things that have to be worked out, but the unemployment insurance is going to pass no matter what.
One of the considerations, though, I think, with the unemployment is that in terms of paying for it, do you agree or not that there's an awful lot of waste in the government, that if if the Senate and the House were aggressive in going out and finding the waste, that we could simply pay for this unemployment or insurance many times over? We
could have paid for that many times over with the amount of money left over from their so-called stimulus bill, or the amount left over from TARP, or any number of other funds that could have paid for it. But they're not going to pay for it. They know they have an advantage because nobody wants to have people suffer or continue to suffer. And unemployment insurance is one way that we alleviate that suffering. On the other hand, that was going to pass no matter what anybody said, and the Democrats have always won on that particular issue. But we should have paid for it. Now, we didn't, and that's one of the things I don't like about the bill. But when you think about it, there's another thing that was going to pass regardless of whether we did this bill or not, and that's the AMT, the Alternative Minimum Tax. That was established to make the 155 multimillionaires who didn't pay any taxes that year pay taxes. Now it affects up to 28 million Americans. Middle-class people that will have to pay for that. So we knew that had to be patched, and that's well over $100 billion. And the fact of the matter is we wanted to keep those tax rates low. The thing that's really bad right now is this omnibus bill. That omnibus bill is $1.1 trillion with all kinds of cats and dogs in it. There's $1 billion in there to implement the Obamacare. I mean, there's a lot of bad things about that particular bill, and they tell me that the Democrats have the votes on it and even have some Republican votes.
I think what most Americans are saying, though, with the omnibus bill is that it is literally it's a foot and a half high. And it's
better than 2,000 pages.
No one is going to read it who's going to vote on it. Everybody in the Senate and the House are going to guess. And the American people sort of think that you send people to Washington to make decisions for them and that they will read through and know what they're voting on. But the fact is, nobody knows what's in that bill, and you don't have time to read it. So I think many Americans are distressed by that.
Well, you're absolutely right on that. I mean,
it should be.
Well, you're darn right they should be. What happened to the 3-day rule that all the Democrats said we would have?
3 days isn't even enough, though. I mean,
well, it isn't, but they don't even have that. You know what gets me? The Democrats have had overwhelming numbers in both the House and the Senate for 4 years. Now, in the last 2 years, not only overwhelming numbers, but the presidency as well. Why did they wait till the last 2 weeks of this session to bring up all of these cats and dogs and all of these big spending issues knowing that they might be able to put them through. And that's after they got waxed at the polls.
Well, they did it because it's after the election, and I think one fair criticism that taxpayers have is that that people don't want to do tough decisions before the election. And if you back it up a little bit further, that this omnibus spending bill is to finance the government, which started October 1st, for the year that started October 1st. So it really is, nobody's been doing this work up here. It's happening well after the deadline. And
well, you're making my case, because, okay, so they didn't want to do the necessary things that people should do and are elected to do in the first 4 years, in the last 4 years, and they waited till October. That's still 2 or 3 months before the last 2 weeks. And I've got to tell you, that's not the way to run a country. That's not the way to run a party. And I think the American people, that's why they changed the House. No, they changed the Senate to a degree. We got 7 more seats, but it's still 53, you know, to 47. And when we get in next year, and they're trying to push things through now with people who weren't elected.
Should the American people be proud at the way that the tax bill has happened and the omnibus bill has happened, or should they be anguished by the way it's done at the last minute, and even with how it seems to have been just many things passed without even reading?
Well, I think the American people should be happy that we've at least been able to work out this tax bill, because we've kept the rates down and we have not increased taxes. We also are solving some very serious problems.
How about the omnibus bill?
But they can't be happy with that omnibus bill.
Not even substantively, I'm talking about the process.
Yeah, the process is terrible there. Why are we suddenly with an omnibus bill right at the end of this session? Because they didn't do any appropriations work during the year. They didn't come up with a budget. The Appropriations Committee did not come up with appropriations bills.
The rest of us get fired if we did that.
Yeah, you'd get fired.
I mean, we get fired. It's like, you know, it's astounding the way things get put off to the last minute. If you're in college and you do things at the last minute, you cram, you usually don't do particularly well on the exam.
Well, that's right. I mean, look, the rest of the world has to live up to its obligations. This outfit here, run by the Democrats, and I have to say there were times when the Republicans didn't do the best job either, but they at least tried to have appropriations bills and have, you know, transparency in passing appropriations bills. Both sides have had troubles getting budgets out because it's a very difficult process, but at least an attempt ought to be made. And I've got to tell you, they wait till the last minute so that they can basically punish the American people with stuff that they know they'd never get through otherwise, even though they've had these huge majorities.
Senator, thank you, sir.